Unreliable employees like you don't deserve a place here. You're fired. Your desk is already cleared. My vision blurred. And for a split second, I thought the anesthesia was playing tricks on me. But no, the words were real. Edward Collins, the CEO I had served for years, had just erased my career with a single text while I lay in a hospital bed, stitches still fresh from surgery. As I lay there, struggling to absorb the cruelty of those words, I realized one simple truth: nothing matters more than health. Then, never ignore the signs when your body tells you something's wrong. By the way, where are you watching this from? Drop it in the comments. And if you're feeling the story so far, tap the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. My name is Celestine Brooks. I'm 36 years old, and until that moment, I was Senior Client Director at Hallstrom Analytics, a Chicago-based financial consulting firm, for 7 years. I had poured my life into that division: late nights, endless flights, missed anniversaries and holidays, building relationships that kept the company alive in a crowded, cutthroat market. And now, discarded by the man who benefited most from my sacrifices, I felt smaller than the machines beeping beside me. Edward Collins was everything I was not: ruthless where I was loyal, calculating where I was human. He thrived on intimidation, convinced fear equaled respect. To him, people were tools, nothing more. He had mocked kindness as weakness, and today he proved it, choosing to strike at the exact moment I was most vulnerable. His cruelty wasn't an accident, it was a performance, and the humiliation burned deeper than any surgical wound. I turned the phone over, fighting the sting in my chest, when a low chuckle rose from the bed beside mine. I had almost forgotten the curtain didn't divide me from an empty space but another patient. Slowly, I shifted my gaze. The man was older, maybe mid-50s, silver streaking his temples, his eyes sharp even in the dim light. He tilted his head toward me, voice rough but amused. "Bad news?" For a heartbeat, I didn't answer. Then my stomach dropped as recognition struck. I had seen his photo in Forbes, read about his aggressive expansions. Adrian Whitmore, CEO of Arcus Partners, the very rival Edward feared most, was lying 3 feet away, watching the fallout of my disgrace. And in that moment, my humiliation twisted into something else: the uneasy spark of possibility. The sound of that chuckle lingered in the sterile hospital air, and for a moment I wondered if I was imagining it. Slowly, I turned my head, every movement tugging against the stitches in my abdomen. The man in the bed beside mine looked nothing like a patient on the edge of vulnerability. His posture was relaxed, his eyes sharp, and the faint smirk on his lips carried a kind of measured detachment that made my stomach knot tighter. He didn't need to introduce himself. Recognition came rushing in like a tidal wave. I had seen that face on magazine covers and financial reports. Adrian Whitmore, CEO of Arcus Partners, the very rival Edward Collins had spent years warning us about, was 3 feet away, watching the fallout of my humiliation. I blinked hard, unsettled. Of all the places, of all the hospital wards, fate had delivered me here. "Bad news?" he asked again, his voice calm, almost conversational. My throat tightened. I wanted to hide the phone, to keep the shame private, but my body betrayed me, with trembling fingers. I tilted the screen so he could see the text for himself. His eyes scanned it once, twice, before he gave a short laugh that sounded more like a verdict than sympathy. "That takes a special kind of cruelty," he said, setting the words down with clinical precision. I didn't know how to respond. The humiliation of Edward's message burned hot in my chest. But the presence of Adrian Whitmore added a new layer, something between fear and curiosity. "You know who I am," I whispered, more a statement than a question. He tilted his head. "Celestine Brooks, Senior Client Director at Hallstrom. Of course I know you. His tone was casual, but there was intent beneath it, the kind that made me feel as if I was already part of a game I hadn't chosen to play. Confusion spread through me. Edward had always acted as though I was invisible outside the firm, a replaceable cog in the machine. And yet here was his greatest competitor, calling me by name as if I were already on his radar. I frowned. How? Adrian leaned back against his pillows, eyes steady on mine. Your name has surfaced more than once in closed-door talks, negotiations where Hallstrom tried to hold their ground. They said their edge was you, the woman who could calm a boardroom in crisis and close deals others couldn't. He paused, letting the weight of his words hang between us. Edward may have treated you like a disposable tool, but to the rest of us, you were the lock he never admitted we couldn't pick. The room seemed to tilt. My pulse raced, but not from the pain in my abdomen. For years I had believed loyalty was my shield, that if I worked harder, sacrificed more, my value would be obvious. Yet the truth was twisted. The one who should have recognized me most had chosen to discard me, while the rival he despised had kept track of me all along. Why are you telling me this? I asked cautiously, suspicion curling at the edges of my voice. His expression didn't soften, but there was something deliberate in the way he answered. Because it matters who knows your worth. Edward made a mistake today, a costly one, and while you may not see it yet, he just handed you the kind of leverage most people never get in a lifetime. I sank back against the pillows, my body still weak, my mind spiraling. The humiliation of Edward's text was still raw, but now it tangled with something new, an uneasy realization that I wasn't as invisible as I thought. My name had been spoken in rooms I had never entered, by men who had measured me more carefully than my own boss ever did. And lying there in that hospital ward, caught between pain and possibility, I felt the first stirrings of doubt, not about myself, but about everything Edward had led me to believe. I couldn't look away from Adrian Whitmore's face, sharp and unreadable in the dull glow of the ward light. His words from a moment ago still echoed in my head, unsettling me more than I wanted to admit. My name, my work, my reputation. He had known all of it before ever laying eyes on me in this hospital. And now, with Edward's text message still seared into my mind, I felt the humiliation boiling over into anger. 7 years of loyalty, of canceled vacations and sleepless nights, had been erased with 3 sentences. I wanted to scream, but the stitches in my abdomen and the dry ache in my throat held me silent. Edward Collins had reduced me to nothing with a push of his thumb, yet this man beside me, a rival I had been warned about for years, spoke as if I had value. The contradiction burned like acid. Adrian leaned slightly toward me, his voice low, but steady. You do realize, don't you? Clients don't stay because of a company's name on a contract. They stay because of the person who answers the phone at 2 a.m, the one who knows their panic before they even say it out loud. They stayed with Hallstrom because of you. I swallowed hard, torn between disbelief and the tiny flicker of recognition his words ignited. It was true. I had been there through impossible deadlines, boardroom meltdowns, mergers hanging by a thread. My phone had never been off. My empathy never faked. Those clients trusted me, but the thought of them following me, leaving behind the brand name they'd been tied to for years, it felt reckless, even delusional. You make it sound simple, I whispered, bitterness in my voice. But Edward owns the contracts. He owns the narrative. And my voice cracked. I'm just the one he threw away. Adrian studied me, his expression unreadable, then gave the faintest shake of his head. No, that's where you're wrong. Edward owns paper. You own trust. Contracts can be broken, rewritten, renegotiated. But loyalty built over years? That isn't his to control. That belongs to you. The words hit me harder than I expected. My anger at Edward's betrayal didn't vanish. It sharpened. I thought of his smug face, his cutting remarks when I dared question his decisions, the way he paraded his nephew around as if incompetence could be excused by bloodline. He had spent years underestimating me, branding me replaceable, yet here was his greatest fear in the flesh, Adrian Whitmore, telling me I was anything but. I clenched the edge of my blanket, trying to steady my breathing. Even if what you say is true, Edward won't let me walk away quietly. He'll bury me in threats and lawsuits until I can't breathe. Adrian's lips curved, not into kindness, but into something sharper, like a blade catching the light. He can try, but he's already made his fatal mistake. He paused, letting silence stretch until I leaned forward despite the pull of pain in my side. His eyes locked on mine, cool and unflinching. Edward just delivered you to me on a silver platter. For a heartbeat. The room seemed to freeze. I searched his face for sarcasm, for mockery, but found only certainty. The fury churning inside me collided with an unfamiliar current. Hope. Fragile. Dangerous. But real. Edward thought he had humiliated me, ended me. Instead, he had placed me directly in the sightline of the man he feared most. I lay back slowly, my mind torn between anger and possibility. I didn't trust Adrian, not yet, but I couldn't ignore the truth. Edward had discarded me in my weakest moment, and in doing so, he had set into motion something he could never control. The hospital ward grew quieter as the night deepened, the steady rhythm of machines filling the silence with their mechanical heartbeat. I shifted uncomfortably against the stiff mattress, every movement pulling at the raw ache in my abdomen. Pain reminded me I was fragile, but humiliation reminded me I was not broken. Edward's text still pulsed in my mind like a wound that wouldn't close. Sleep was impossible. My body begged for rest, yet my thoughts refused to still. I kept seeing Edward's words, hearing Adrian's voice echoing beside me. Edward just delivered you to me on a silver platter, somewhere between the sting of betrayal and the shock of that twist. A decision began to form. Not loud, not reckless, but quiet and deliberate. I reached for the discharge papers folded on the table by my bed. The nurse's pen still clipped to the top, with shaky hands. I turned the page over and began to write. One name, then another. Each one carried the weight of years of midnight calls, last-minute flights, handshakes after impossible deals. North River Manufacturing, East Stone Bio, Meridian Logistics. The letters wavered, uneven from the stiffness in my fingers, but they anchored me. It was more than a list. It was a reminder that my value didn't vanish because Edward said so. These were people who trusted me, not Hallstrom's logo. I thought of their faces, their gratitude when deadlines were met, their relief when crises were calmed. With every name I wrote, the humiliation dulled, replaced by a sharper focus. The pain in my abdomen flared, forcing me to pause. But I pressed on. Loyalty had cost me everything, but clarity was giving me back something Edward could never control, the truth of what I had built. By the time the page filled, nearly 30 companies stared back at me. Together, they represented tens of millions in annual revenue, and all of them had built their strategies around me. My chest tightened, not from surgery, but from the realization that these names were not just history. They could be my future. I stared at the list. The ink smudged slightly from my trembling grip, and for the first time since Edward's text, I felt a sliver of power return, on instinct. I flipped through the papers the nurse had left behind, routine forms, generic hospital notices, but wedged between them, folded carelessly, was a copy of one of the client contracts Edward had once asked me to review. I smoothed it out on my lap, scanning with tired eyes. My gaze snagged on a paragraph I had nearly forgotten existed. Key person clause. The words stood stark against the page. If the named account lead, me, was no longer with Hallstrom, the client reserved the right to terminate immediately without penalty. My pulse quickened, the ache in my body forgotten for a moment. It wasn't just loyalty that tied these companies to me. It was legal leverage Edward himself had signed off on, never expecting he would be the one to cut me loose. A shaky laugh escaped my lips, half disbelief, half defiance. The irony was brutal. In trying to erase me, Edward had set a trap for himself years earlier, buried in the fine print he thought no one would notice. I leaned back against the pillows, the list of names in one hand, the clause in the other. The pain was still there, but it no longer controlled me. Determination settled in its place, heavy and unshakable. Edward believed he had ended my story with a text message. Instead, he had given me the map to his undoing. As the ward lights dimmed further and the city outside slipped into restless silence, I pressed the pen to the page once more. This time, I wasn't just writing names. I was writing the beginning of something Edward Collins would never see coming. Are you curious about that unexpected clause I just found? What do you think the villain will do when he realizes? Stay with me. There are some twists ahead you won't want to miss. The list of names still lay on the nightstand when I returned home, folded neatly inside the discharge papers. Each one stared back at me like a promise and a threat. I couldn't stop thinking about the key person clause, about the way Edward had unknowingly signed his own vulnerability years earlier. Yet with every flicker of hope came a heavier weight pressing on my chest. What if Adrian was wrong? What if Edward came after me with every lawyer in Chicago? That evening, when the apartment was finally quiet, I sat at the kitchen table with my husband, Mark. He poured tea into 2 chipped mugs, watching me carefully, as if the wrong word might break me in two. I pushed the folded paper across the table. "These are the clients," I said softly. "If they know I'm gone, they can walk, legally, no penalties." Mark's brow furrowed. He didn't even touch the paper. "Celestine, do you hear yourself? You've just had surgery. You can barely walk down the hall without pain. And you're talking about contracts and leverage? Edward will crush you if you try anything. He'll tie us up in lawsuits for years." His words stung because they carried truth. Edward was vindictive. He had the money, the lawyers, the influence. Mark leaned closer, his voice almost pleading. "You don't owe Hallstrom anything, but you also don't have to fight them. Maybe this is a sign to just let it go. Focus on healing. Focus on us." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to bury the paper under a stack of unopened mail and pretend Edward's text hadn't carved a scar into my life. But I couldn't. The list wasn't just ink on a page. It was proof of my worth. Proof that I hadn't been disposable, no matter how cruelly Edward had tried to frame me. "I can't let it go," I whispered, staring down at the table. "If I stay silent, then he wins. And everything I sacrificed, every night I spent away from you and Maya, it all means nothing." Mark exhaled sharply, rubbing his temples. "I'm afraid, Cell. Afraid for you, for us. He has resources we don't. And if he drags us into court, do you know what that will do to us financially? Emotionally?" His voice cracked on the last word. And for the first time, I saw not just worry, but fear. Not for himself. For me. He had watched me come home hollow-eyed from red-eye flights, had waited through dinners that went cold, had carried our family alone when I carried Hallstrom on my shoulders. And now, he was terrified the same company would destroy what was left of me. I reached across the table, my fingers brushing his. "I don't want to lose us," I said quietly. "But I also can't live chained to Edward's cruelty. He doesn't get to decide my worth." Before Mark could answer, A small voice drifted from the hallway. "Mom?" We both turned. Maya stood there in her pajamas, hair messy from sleep, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes were wide, too awake for this hour. "Mom! Are we in trouble?" The words hit me harder than any legal threat ever could. For a second, I couldn't breathe. She had heard enough to sense the fear, the tension. In her world, trouble meant something simple, missed homework, a broken toy. But in mine, it meant lawsuits, reputations, futures hanging by a thread. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "No, sweetheart," I said softly. "We're not in trouble. Mommy's just figuring some things out." But as I watched her clutch the rabbit tighter, the truth sank deep into me. This wasn't just about contracts or revenge anymore. It was about the kind of life I wanted my daughter to see me fight for, or surrender to. And for the first time that night, my fear of Edward collided with something stronger. The fear of showing my child what it looks like to stay silent in the face of injustice. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a lobby bathed in glass and polished marble. My reflection flashed across every surface, and for the first time since the hospital, I felt exposed in a different way. My steps echoed against the floor as I followed the receptionist through Arcus Partners headquarters. Each stride reminding me that my body was still healing, my stitches pulling gently with every breath. But the real tension wasn't in my abdomen, it was in my chest, where anxiety pressed against anticipation like two forces colliding. Adrian Whitmore was waiting in a conference room that overlooked the Hudson River. The view stretched endlessly, calm and commanding, but I couldn't take my eyes off him. He rose when I entered, his presence as measured as it had been in the hospital, though now framed by a suit that spoke of boardrooms, not recovery wards. "Celestine," he greeted warmly, extending his hand as though we were old acquaintances. "I'm glad you came." I sank into the chair across from him, my palms damp against the leather armrests. "I don't want to waste your time," I said quickly, my voice steadier than I felt. "If I'm here, it's for one reason. Edward threw me away, but my clients trust me. That hasn't changed." A small smile tugged at his lips, as if that was precisely what he had expected me to say. Without a word, he slid a folder across the table. My breath caught as I opened it. Draft contracts, compensation figures, equity breakdowns, all spelled out in careful detail. But my eyes froze on the title line, Vice President, Client Strategy. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The words blurred, heavy with a weight I had never been offered at Hallstrom. Not just a seat at the table, but a voice, authority, ownership. My throat tightened. "This is more than I expected." Adrian leaned back slightly, his gaze unwavering. "You've been underestimated for too long. I don't make that mistake twice." I wanted to believe him, but suspicion curled in my stomach. Deals too good to be true often were. "Why me?" I asked, finally meeting his eyes. "You have resources, teams of analysts. Why risk giving me equity, authority, all of this?" His smile didn't falter, but his answer was razor sharp. "Because you are the difference. I can hire skill, I can buy data. What I cannot replicate is trust. Those clients, your clients, see you as the reason they stayed with Hallstrom. They will follow you. And with you here, Arcus doesn't just win accounts, we win the war." I exhaled slowly, the air trembling in my chest. The ambition in his words both terrified and exhilarated me. A part of me wanted to sign immediately, to claim back the dignity Edward had ripped away. Another part whispered caution. Was I simply trading one master for another? I closed the folder, my fingers resting on its smooth surface. "And if I say no?" I asked quietly, for the first time. Adrian's expression shifted, a flicker of steel beneath the calm. He leaned forward, his voice low, deliberate. If you refuse, Arcus will still crush Hallstrom. Make no mistake about that, but without you, we lose something we can't get back. A once-in-a-lifetime chance to dismantle Edward Collins with the very person he underestimated most. The words settled between us like a live wire. My pulse quickened, not just from fear, but from the undeniable truth he had laid bare. Edward thought he had discarded me. Instead, he had delivered me into the hands of the man he feared most. I sat back in silence, my heart caught between suspicion and the spark of something I hadn't felt in weeks. Possibility. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, cursor blinking against the white screen of my LinkedIn profile. The folder Adrian had given me the day before rested nearby, its weight both reassuring and intimidating. I had spent the night turning his words over in my mind, each one pulling me back and forth between fear and resolve. Finally, with my hands still trembling, I began typing. After 7 years at Hallstrom Analytics, I'm excited to begin a new chapter as Vice President of Client Strategy at Arcus Partners. No bitterness, no blame, just a statement of fact. I hesitated, my finger hovering over the post button. Once I clicked, there would be no turning back. I thought of Edward's text message, the smug cruelty behind each word. My chest tightened. Then I thought of Maya's small voice asking if we were in trouble. I owed her more than silence. With a steady breath, I pressed post. The update went live. For a moment, nothing happened. Just the hum of the refrigerator, the tick of the clock on the wall. Then, within minutes, the notifications began to appear. Likes, comments, congratulations from colleagues I hadn't spoken to in years. My heart pounded with every new ping, a reminder that the world was watching. But it wasn't until my phone rang that the full weight of what I'd done sank in. The number flashing across the screen made my breath catch. North River Manufacturing, Edward's pride and joy. He had once bragged in a quarterly meeting that they would never leave Hallstrom, that their loyalty was unshakable. I answered, my voice tentative. This is Celestine. Celestine, came the reply, firm and unhesitating. It was Angela Chang, their CFO. I just saw your announcement. Tell me, is it true? You're no longer at Hallstrom? I swallowed. That's right. I've joined Arcus. There was no pause, no careful diplomacy. Then we want to move with you, effective immediately. Draft a proposal, and we'll review it this week. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The silence stretched, my mind struggling to catch up. This was the very client Edward had waved around like a trophy, proof of his dominance. And now, without hesitation, they were choosing me. Angela, I finally managed, my voice trembling. Are you sure? This is a major shift. She cut me off. Edward's nephew called us last week. He didn't know our project timelines. He didn't even understand the terms of our current contract. We ended the call early. You were the reason we trusted Hallstrom, not their name. If you're at Arcus, we want to be at Arcus. When the call ended, I sat frozen, the phone still pressed against my ear. Then slowly, a laugh bubbled up, shaky, disbelieving, but real. The humiliation of the hospital bed felt distant now, replaced by something steadier, stronger. I looked at the list I had scribbled days earlier. The ink smudged and uneven. North River Manufacturing was the first name I had written. And now, they were the first to call. The irony was almost too sharp to bear. Edward had paraded their loyalty as untouchable, a fortress he believed would never fall. Yet the moment I stepped outside his shadow, that fortress had chosen me, for the first time since this began. I didn't just feel hope, I felt power. The euphoria of North River's call hadn't even faded when my phone rang again. This time, The number on the screen was one I knew too well. Edward Collins. My stomach clenched, and for a moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But fear, sharp, familiar, pressed me to answer. Celestine! His voice snapped the moment the line opened. No greeting, no pause, just my name, spit out like a warning. I hear you've been making calls. Is that true? My throat tightened. Edward, I haven't. Don't lie to me, he cut in. You're jeopardizing everything we built. You think you can walk away and hand my clients to Whitmore? I will bury you in court. Do you hear me? Non-compete, non-solicit. You'll be finished. The venom in his voice sent a chill through me. I pressed my palm against the table, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. Images flashed through my mind. Courtrooms, legal fees, years of savings drained. Worse, the look on Mark's face if this spiraled into a public battle, the fear in Maya's eyes if she heard whispers at school. My chest constricted. I don't want to fight, I said quietly, forcing my voice not to crack. But you fired me. Edward, you left me no choice. You were unreliable, he shot back. You think you can spin this? I'll drag your name through the mud until no one hires you again. Your family won't survive the fallout. That word, family, hit like a knife. I closed my eyes, fighting the surge of panic. This wasn't just about me anymore. It never had been. Every threat he made twisted itself around the people I loved most. And for a moment, I almost faltered. Maybe Mark was right. Maybe I should let it go. Walk away. Protect us from the storm. But before I could speak, a new voice entered the line. Calm. Precise. Female. Mr. Collins, this is Priya Kapoor, General Counsel for Arcus Partners. Celestine is with me now. The silence on Edward's end was sharp, a cut in the air. Priya continued, her tone steady but surgical. Your threats are baseless. Ms. Brooks was terminated without cause. Under Illinois law, your non-compete and non-solicit provisions hold no weight. She has solicited no one. Clients have contacted her after a lawful announcement of her employment with Arcus. Any further harassment will be documented for the record. Edward's breathing turned harsh, uneven. You don't know what you're talking about, he snapped. But the confidence was gone, replaced by desperation. I know exactly what I'm talking about, Priya replied evenly. If you have further concerns, direct them to our office in writing. This call is over. And just like that, the line went dead. I sat frozen, phone still in my hand, my heart pounding against my ribs. The weight of Edward's threats lingered, but beneath it, something shifted. For the first time, I hadn't been alone in the storm. Someone had spoken for me, cut through his fury with facts he couldn't twist. Priya turned to me, her expression calm but firm. He'll bluster. Men like him always do. But legally, he has nothing. You're free. Celestine. Freer than you realize. Her words washed over me like a shield. The fear didn't vanish. It never does in a single breath. But the grip around my chest loosened. Edward could scream, threaten, pound his fists against the walls of his crumbling empire. But in that moment, he was powerless, and for the first time since the hospital, I believed it. The apartment was quiet that night, but inside me, nothing was still. Edward's threats still echoed in my mind, each word a ghost clinging to the walls. Priya had shut him down with calm precision, reminding me that the law was on my side. Yet fear lingered. Men like Edward didn't stop with one call. They circled. They schemed. They struck when least expected. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the list of names I had written days earlier, when my phone buzzed again. The number was unfamiliar, but local. My breath caught, against my better judgment. I answered. Celestine, a hushed voice whispered. Yes, I said cautiously. It's Dana Patel. I shouldn't be doing this, but you need to know. I froze. Dana was one of Hallstrom's senior project managers, sharp, dependable, and one of the few people I had trusted during my years there. Dana, what's going on? Her voice shook, the words spilling fast. Edward is using your name. He had us reissue client emails as if they came from you. He's signing your initials on project records, pretending you're still running accounts. He thinks it will buy him time. Make clients believe nothing has changed. My stomach dropped, bile rising in my throat. The thought of my name being weaponized by the man who had discarded me, it was worse than humiliation. It was theft of the very identity I had built my career on. That's fraud, I whispered, gripping the phone tighter. I know, Dana said urgently. And it's bigger than that. He's pushing unauthorized change orders, inflating revenue projections. It's reckless. If clients find out, it could collapse everything overnight. I've documented emails, approvals, timestamps. I'm not protecting him. Celestine. Not after what he did to you. I pressed a hand to my mouth, trying to steady my breathing. Terror coursed through me, hot and suffocating. Edward wasn't just vindictive. He was desperate, dangerous. If he was willing to falsify records in my name, what else might he do? Drag me into investigations? Frame me to cover his tracks? The thought made my hands shake. But beneath the fear, something stronger stirred. Dana had chosen to call me. She trusted me, not Edward. That trust was proof of something Edward could never control. Loyalty earned honestly. Dana, I said slowly, be careful. If he finds out, I've already sent the evidence, she cut in. Directly to the board. They need to know what he's doing. I copied legal on everything. He can't bury this. For a moment, the world seemed to tilt. The board. Evidence. Internal investigation. This wasn't just whispers in a hallway or rumors in a conference room. It was formal. It was real. Edward's own people were turning against him, armed with proof he couldn't spin away. I leaned back in my chair, the fear still raw, but mingling now with a sharp current of strength. You're brave, Danny, I said quietly. Thank you for trusting me. Don't thank me, she replied. Just be ready. Things are about to break wide open. Then the line clicked dead. I sat in the silence that followed, heart pounding. Terror still clawed at me. The thought of Edward dragging my name through forged emails making my skin crawl. Yet Dana's courage lit something inside me. For the first time, I wasn't alone in this fight. Hallstrom's walls were cracking, not because I had pushed, but because Edward had poisoned them from within. I stared again at the list of clients, at the names written in my uneven hand. The fear hadn't vanished, it never would, but it no longer owned me. Edward thought he could bury me under lies. Instead, his own deceit was about to bury him. The days that followed Dana's call felt like walking across thin ice. Every morning, I woke with a knot in my stomach, wondering if today would be the day Edward struck back harder, or if the board would finally see through the lies. The tension was unbearable. Even small sounds, the buzz of my phone, the chime of an email, made my heart jolt. Then the leak happened. An article appeared in a trade publication, citing sources close to Hallstrom's leadership. The words blurred as I read, but the meaning was clear enough. The board stands firmly behind CEO Edward Collins as the firm navigates client transitions. They had quoted him directly, bragging about continuity and commitment, insisting Hallstrom would not lose a single account under his watch. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. It was exactly the narrative he wanted. Edward, the steady hand, the savior holding things together. The article painted him not as a desperate man scrambling to cover fraud, but as a leader who could weather the storm. My hands trembled as I forwarded the piece to Adrian and Priya. Within minutes, Priya called. It's posturing, she said firmly. A PR maneuver. They're trying to calm investors. But I could hear the strain in her voice, the hesitation she was trying to mask. I wasn't imagining it. The board hadn't fired him. They hadn't even suspended him, instead. They had given him their backing, at least publicly. When I hung up, I felt a hollow weight settle in my chest. Was I fighting a battle I couldn't win? Edward had money, influence, the company's full communications machine behind him. I had one contract clause, a handful of loyal clients, and the truth. But truth didn't always win in boardrooms. That night, Mark found me at the kitchen table again, staring blankly at my list of clients. He rested a hand on my shoulder. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I think he's going to get away with it," I whispered. My throat raw. The board is protecting him. If they believe his story, if clients believe it. My voice faltered. Maybe I should have stayed quiet. Mark crouched beside me, forcing me to meet his eyes. "Sell. You've come too far to go back. You've already shown them his weakness. Just wait. People see through liars eventually." His words steadied me for the moment, but the unease gnawed at me all night. I couldn't shake the image of Edward smirking, standing before the board, spinning his narrative while they nodded along. The following afternoon, the twist came, my phone rang. And this time, the number made me freeze in disbelief. Meridian Logistics. They were one of Hallstrom's anchor accounts, a cornerstone contract Edward had once called unbreakable, I answered, forcing my voice steady. "This is Celestine." It was their vice president, Valentina Morales. Her tone was clipped, efficient, but beneath it, I heard steel. "Ms. Brooks, we wanted you to know directly. Following Hallstrom's board meeting, we've reviewed our position, effective immediately. We are terminating our agreement with them." I blinked, stunned. "Terminating, but..."